This is Pritika, and you're listening to Millennials Bully, the show which is all about millennials. Hello, listeners. Welcome to this week's episode of Millennials Bully. Our topic for this week is Millennials Bully Right. Today on the show, we have Zack Shah. Zack is a millennial writer and he gained popularity with his debut publication, More Than Words, and has gone on to publishing his second book, A Strange and Wicked Magic. We are so excited to have you on the show today. Thanks for being here, Zack.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be a part of another podcast, so thank you for having me.
Perfect. And it's so nice to have you on the show, Zach, because I think writing is such an important part about life, really, and reading as well. And to have a millennial writer is something that is so special, I think, for other millennials as well, to sort of see you and to sort of be inspired by the works that you have done. So I'm so very excited for this episode for the very reason that you are a writer. So let's go straight into some of the questions and then let's learn a bit about you, Zach, today in today's episode.
Okay, I am terrible with introductions, so I'll try my best. So, okay, my name is Zack Shah. You can actually find me on LinkedIn. I'm not discreet. I'm pretty much everyone will know what I'm doing if you go on my LinkedIn. So, my pen name is Zack Shah. I am a poet, writer, and author. I've been writing, I want to say all my life, but I've only recently been published formally in 2019 with More Than Words, my debut publication. Although there's a backstory to that, so we'll talk about that later. And so you could say I've officially been a poet for like 19, like 5 years, I guess, since the publication of my second book, Strange and Wicked Magic. So I really hope I can continue to doing this, putting up books. And yeah, I'm 28 years old. I'm a content writer for a marketing, digital marketing company, and I live in Petaling Jaya right now. So I think that's it.
Very nice. And I think I love your introduction, and it's good to know that you're also a PJite. I'm also a PJite. So I think there'll be some similarities there, I think, as we talk. But you mentioned some interesting things. And I guess what I would like to know is how did you first sort of like have that spark where you thought, maybe this is something I would like to try. Writing is something that I would like to have a go at. Like when did that sort of come to be for you?
I've been on like many like talks and seminars before this, and like a lot of interviews as well, both online and written. And I feel like I changed my answers a lot because it was such a long time ago. I'm like 28, and I think I've been writing since I was like in my teens. And I always say that I have like a goldfish brain. Like I can barely remember what happened 5 minutes ago, let alone like 10 years ago. I think that's part of being a millennial now. We all have like depression and anxiety and like attention problems because of we're always on social media. And I think it's starting to affect me in my old age. So but the same thing I always say, the theme of my answer to this question is usually you know a J.K. Rowling. I mean, we all know who she is. She's the author of the Harry Potter books. International bestseller, multi-million industry. It's not just books. It's like merchandise and like the Universal Studios. And you know um and you know it wasn't like that back when I was younger. It was just the books. And I remember my parents talking about royalties and how you can make like lots of money just by writing books. And when you used to at sekolah rendah, they will give you these like files where you have to like cita-cita anda apa, and you will write like outrageous things like astronaut and like musician and I always wrote writer, like for some reason. Like it was even back then, it was like scientist, teacher, and like writer. It was like the last option. And obviously the first two didn't quite pan out. Although just to like go off tangent a bit, like I think if I wasn't a writer, I would really love to teach. I love teaching.
Mhm.
even when I was helping my mom with her tuition and stuff, I would always like love teaching kids like English. So back to the question, like I think even then, like I knew like maybe it would not be such a bad idea to like write a book. But the problem is I I had very lofty goals back then. I was like, oh, maybe I should write a novel like Harry Potter, 300, 400 pages. But I learned very quickly that I did not have the attention span to write such a long form of literature of a literary text. So I was like, okay, maybe short stories. This was back when I was in my college years. I would always start out, a novel or a short story with like a very like amazing backstory, the world building, the characters, all the plots are like figured out. But then when it actually comes to the process of sitting down and write, I would not get more than like 3 or 4 pages. So I wasn't really like, oh, I have to publish a book, like back then it was like it's more like a pipe dream. Yeah, you can see it, you can think of it as a pipe dream, writing a book. But then it got really serious when I was into poetry, when I actually started writing, because poetry is simple, more or less, and I figured, early on that I really had a knack for it. So I was like, oh, maybe like this wasn't so impossible. And I suddenly had a manuscript. Like, wow, I had like 200 pages of a manuscript. Maybe I could publish. So this was way back in like 2014, 2013. You know, and my parents were encouraging me for some reason, even though like the poems were kind of terrible. And I did like got a deal. Like it was amazing. Like I
Yeah.
approached yeah, I approached like indie publishers. Indie publishers are not like Silverfish Books or MPH. They are more accepting of like new authors, and like what was the word, entrance, the entrance to the industry. So and my publisher said, don't mention this publisher's name. But I think if you go back in my history, I think you can find out who this publisher is. On Penwing's blog, you can read the full story of what really happened. But suffice to say, they didn't end up publishing me,
Okay.
for very like unfair reasons. The publisher wasn't a very good person, just to put it out there. So that was another dream crushed. I was like, oh, maybe this publishing thing isn't for me. So, but I couldn't stop writing poetry. I decided to try again. And at this point, I was like, I had a surplus of creation. I had a surplus of poems that I didn't know what to do with. And I was like, sure, why not try? It wouldn't cost me money. It would just cost me a lot of time. But, it was time that I was willing to sacrifice, and so I got an offer from Peanut Zin. So they offered me, I sent them the manuscript. They were like, oh, we're excited to publish you. And they did. And this third manuscript that did get end up published but didn't do so well. And now I'm on my fourth manuscript, which I think is like the pillar, or like the pinnacle of my first attempt at poetry. I keep, there's this saying that, in order to be good at something, you have to be better at something first. And I feel like my previous attempts were those was part of that experience, getting better at things. So More Than Words was like, I was like, oh, I'm proud. I want to get this published. For once in my life, I was like, these poems need to be published. Like I owe it. I don't owe it to myself. It's this, at this point. It wasn't like, oh, I had to be published for the money, for the fame, for the glory. Like no. It was more like it's sort of like an almost spiritual experience. I would just wanted to get these books published, and I think the forces of inspiration was like in my favor, and it was like you're good enough at this point. We'll help you on your publishing journey. And then yeah, I feel like they led me to Penguins Publishing for some reason. I felt led. I felt like not to sound like woo magical law of attraction, manifestation stuff, but it did felt like that. It felt like a culmination of like years of like wanting and like not getting, and then finally like birthing out this product, this creation
Yeah.
that has been in the making for decades. I would say it now, because it's 2022. And so it was amazing, penguins, like as they say, the rest is history. It
And
was
I
really
think
good.
and I think like your story is really interesting because you've talked a lot about like the process behind publishing a book, and I think a lot of people don't know that there's a lot of challenges that goes into that process, and some of these challenges you don't really have control over. And being a young writer, that you're trying it for the first time, and you want to get your name out there. It's and people have to believe in you. I mean, you have confidence in yourself, but publishers have to have confidence in your work, and that's so important. And I think it's really interesting that you've come out stronger at the end of it, and you've learned things in that process, and you've got two books now in that time. You've been successful, and it's so nice to hear that a fellow millennial is making their name out there when it comes to writing. So yeah, you've got a really special story then, and it's for your books to come out now, and for them to be out there for people to enjoy. You must be very happy and proud.
Well, it has its ups and downs.
Yeah.
Life isn't perfect, but I am proud. Like, um, uh, how do you say it? It I'm actually going through a lot. I just moved to a new city. I just moved out of my parents' home like in March. So this was all happening while my book was being published, and I was going through a lot of emotional turmoil, a lot of depression, a lot of loneliness. Like I don't know anyone here. I don't have any friends in PJ, and I was
Yeah.
settling into a new job, and there was this bittersweet. You could say it was a bittersweet experience. Publishing my second book and then going through all this emotional turmoil and like hopelessness and like, suicidal thoughts. And in a way, it sort of encompasses my own experience as a human, as anyone living in this day and age can relate to. There's a lot of joy as well. There's a lot of entertainment. There's a lot of pleasure, but there's also this deep sense of like sadness. I mean, I think everyone is a bit sad, and they just
Mm.
don't want to admit it. But I really pour out all of these experiences into A Stranger Wicked Magic. There's a lot of depression, themes of depression and sadness and hopelessness. So yeah, I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing this because I love poetry. That's it.
Well, and I think that's a special thing because I think um, although I think, like you said, poetry, may not be a very popular sort of style of writing in Malaysia, but I think a lot of it just goes to the fact that we haven't been exposed to poetry in the way that I think we should be, and I think that is the. I mean, obviously in Sekolah Menengah and all that, we were shown poetry. I mean, we always remember Shakespeare's life, Life's Brief Candle and things like
Life's
that.
brief
That's
candle. Oh my
yeah,
god.
exactly. Yes, I mean it's like it seems like a lifetime ago, but I mean like it's important actually poetry and I mean obviously it's short and it's got great meaning in it, but it's how you interpret it that is always very different in people, and I think that's what's so amazing with poetry. Is that what you find is the most special thing about poetry? What do you like the most about poetry?
Oh God, I like that it's short. I like that it's not like, a 300-page novel, but you know, again, it's hard to put like a finger on it, or like because poetry is like this. I like to think of it as like, a rainbow. That visible light can be separated into 7 colors. That these things about photons and like refraction and water droplets and sunshine and all that. But at the end of the day, like, people don't really understand how such a beautiful thing can come, out of out of pure coincidence. you know um it's such a to me, like, poetry stirs something deep inside of my soul that's like, it's hard to explain. But when you read something like, and it sort of, yes, that's it, that's the spot, that's the sweet spot.
Mm,
I love its complexity, and it's like a chameleon. It can be anything it wants. It
yeah,
can talk about anything. I
yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's
It's
hard to
it
explain.
It is, and I think, like you said, it's really open to interpretation, and I guess like if I were to read your poems, I might make a different meaning out of it versus another
Yes.
reader that reads it, and I think we all, when we read it, we find parts that connect to us, and we make a sort of a picture based on those one or two lines in that poem, and I guess that is kind of the true beauty of poetry, isn't it? It's that aspect of it.
And you when you talk about how it makes you feel, like you mentioned just now, um the interpretation. I also like poetry because it sort of condenses an emotion or an experience so succinctly that it's sort of where everybody can relate to it in a way that is so universal and evergreen that, even if two people from two different countries with two different upbringings can relate to the same thing. And I think that's beautiful that it connects people in a way that, is beyond, like I said, it's like a higher force, a higher phenomenon, you could say,
Mm.
that connects
Yeah.
us all through words. And I think that's beautiful. And
Yeah, and
I'm happy to be a part of it.
yes, and if I would, I mean, since we're talking about connection and how writing, connects other people, as a millennial writer, how do you think your writing connects to fellow millennials?
Millennials, as cynical as we are, as depressed and like, very, not very hopeful of, the future. We are hopeless romantics. I could list like 10 books that are in the market. It's about like, romance, about, enemies to lovers, and about like, damsels in distress being rescued by heroes, and about people falling in love. We're hopeless romantics to the bone. And you know I know that, people say it's actually bad to be a hopeless romantic, that you sort of um overlook red flags, and like, you love the bad boy types and stuff like that, even though the relationship can be toxic. But I think that's what my book sort of encompasses, even more than words. People read more than words and it's like, oh, it's so beautiful and light and like rainbows and sunshine. But I think if you really look deep into the undertones and like the subtext, it's actually talks about an idealistic mythical love that doesn't really exist in real life. It sort of lives in our own imagination and our own daydreams. Not to say that it's not beautiful, but it sort of takes us away from reality, because we love we love the concept of love. When
Yeah.
that saying, like, you love, you don't love the person. We are in love with the concept of love to the point where it becomes an obsession. I think it's because a lot of us are single and like we don't really know what true relationship is like, you know, and it's becoming a problem because people are keep consuming all this romantic romantic material. And I hate to be a part of the perpetuate the trend, but I feel like I'm part of this cycle um of the millennial loneliness, I like to say, of us wanting love but never having it. Well, for me lah, at least. But I a lot of my friends are single and lonely, and they always dream about having the best, a partner who will love them and like care for them. And I think Modern Words definitely captures that, the idealistic love. But on the flip side, A Strange and Wicked Magic sort of breaks that illusion in a way.
Mm.
If you've read A Strange and Wicked Magic, it's such a drastic contrast from the sort of um, idealistic love of Modern Words. I mean, not everything about Modern Words is idealistic. There's a lot of sad stuff in there too, but a lot of it is like, oh, I'm in love and like my life is perfect and I have the perfect partner and like we're gonna live happy ever after. But more A Strange and Wicked Magic is like, nope, that did not happen. Like that love you
Do you
thought was, yeah.
do you think that there is a personal element to that? Do you think when you wrote More Than Words, do you feel like you were in a different stage of your life, and how that has transformed, or is that more of a um, or is that more of how you have sort of encapsulated love and heartbreak, and sort of in a way self destruction as well? Like how would you have or, what's the thought that went behind like the change in the books that you made?
Well, I actually wrote like 90% of A Stranger in Wicked Magic way back in 2015. Like my manuscripts are old. Like if I were to like go back in time and like, analyze my thought process, my mindset, it I wouldn't know where to start, because I didn't plan for book one and book two to be these themes. It was more like um it was more like poems that I wrote throughout the past years. So I think you're onto something when you say like there's certain stages of my life where it sort of captures my feelings. So, but I feel like again, it's a sort of universal evergreen thing because when you're young, you sort of have this naive, innocent outlook about romance and love. Like, the same with me. When I was young, I thought I'd find, the love of my life, and like, I'd fall in love, and we'd walk off into the sunset. But as I grow up, I realized that maybe that's not how life works. I mean, I'm happy that so many of us have found true love. So many of us are married with kids. And, even if you're not married with kids and you're happy, that is not a problem. As long as you're happy, you found your soulmate. But, that has not been my experience. So I guess um, that sort of shatters, like, the illusion of,
Yeah.
true love. I mean, I still believe in true love. I'm a hopeless romantic. I'm a millennial. We're millennials, right? We
We're
believe.
millennials, we're hopeless
Yeah,
romantics, yeah.
yeah. I mean, Taylor Swift literally has uh, um, wait, is it? Is it has had? Does she have a song titled "Hopeless Romantic"?
I mean, I believe she does. She does talk a lot about
Yeah,
like romance and sort of that
yeah,
young love in her song. So I'm sure, to be honest, I'm not very
yeah,
well versed with Taylor Swift
yeah,
in some of, but yeah, but her music I think is it's like poetry, isn't it? Music is like that.
yeah.
I mean, and there's
Ta-
elements of that, yeah.
yeah. Taylor Swift is one of the best poets of our generation, I would say,
Yeah,
because music is a form of poetry. And if you look at
yeah.
her parallelism, like one of her lyrics is like devils roll the dice, angels roll their eyes. And I was like,
Mm.
that is such a poetic way of thinking that is like so missing in our generation. Like, people sing her songs all the time, but they don't really appreciate her poetry.
Yeah. Yeah, true, true. I think yeah, you're so right about that. And yeah, and I think maybe, like when we like going back to sort of what we talked about, how maybe Malaysians maybe that they're not reading poetry in script, but perhaps they're appreciating it in other ways, like through music and through acting
Subconsciously.
in the yeah, subconsciously. I think they're taking it in. So I think it's time for them to be exposed to. It's time for us to be exposed to poetry, really. So yeah, it's beautiful. If I go a little bit into your poem, I want to read a line from your poem actually that I saw from your book, Strange and Wicked Magic. So there's this line, this stanza actually, that reads, "Fleeting moments and falling stars, bleeding wounds and fading scars." So to me, so since we talked about interpretation, to me, this line speaks of healing. For me, it speaks of healing. And do you think that Malaysian millennials might be in the process of healing from the aftermath of the pandemic?
Well, I think we're all healing from something at this point. Like everyone has their open wounds, and fading scars. And even me, that's why I write poetry. It's part of my healing process. As for the pandemic, I can only speak for myself. I mean, not to say that the pandemic isn't a terrible thing. A lot of people lost their loved ones, their family members, and that is an actual healing that they have to go through. The grieving process, the anger, the sadness, all the five stages that people talk about. And that's a terrible thing to experience. Like, I don't think I could survive if my parents died, or I lost a cat once. Like, he was a family cat. And his death like shook us all. Like, even now when I think about it, I'm brought to tears because of how much he meant to us. He was like back when I was a teenager, and has been in our lives, and he died, very painfully, and we had to euthanize him. And it was such a terrible thing, and I feel like I'm still healing from that. So I can't imagine all the people who have lost their family members during the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think from like a less serious standpoint, I feel like we lost a lot of time during the pandemic.
Yeah.
We, especially the teenagers, my God, all the young kids who had to go through online learning and like missing their friends and, missing a huge chunk of their childhood. My God, 2 years.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not just gonna
Absolutely.
come back. Even me as an
Yeah.
adult with a lot of like I missed out of my youth. When the pandemic hit, actually, I was in my third semester in college. So I was just, this was my last hurrah. This was the last call. Like after this, I have to be an adult. I can't be a kid anymore. This was my last chance at truly savoring my youth. Holding on to my youth for the last time, having going out with friends and staying up late. But that was taken away from me, and it was out of everyone's control. We couldn't control it.
Yeah, and I guess, yeah, and I think only time will sort of tell how we recover from this.
Yeah,
And I'm sure we will, but obviously, I think we're going to be left with, a little bit of unhappiness. And I think millennials, especially, because I think we do feel, I mean, I personally feel like we've been robbed from our youth a little bit.
yeah,
And, this was the time for us really to explore ourselves and to, see things and things
yeah,
like that. And we were just locked in the
yeah.
house for 2 years as a result
Yeah.
so of the pandemic. So, yeah, it feels a bit like an injustice, but, something that we can't control,
I
obviously.
think I think it's also a bit of irony there. Like it's a bit ironic that Mahathir had this wawasan 2020, and this was our
Yeah.
wawasan 2020. Not flying
Yeah.
cars, not sky, not advanced technology or like AI. It's like death and destruction and sadness everywhere. So it's sort
Yeah.
of like you know the universe really said no. Your wawasan 2020 is like out the door, girl. Like we are not giving you your wawasan 2020. So it was like, well, that's Mahathir's dream down the drain, I guess.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
And yeah, and I mean, yeah, but what I think is great is that we have writing, right? And perhaps,
Yeah.
I want to think that writing helps us, and I think it's because we were locked indoors, we had to force ourselves to sort of make peace with the fact that we're indoors and maybe read and to explore poetry, So yeah, I guess that's quite a nice thing to think about. And, we talked a little bit about poetry and sort of life and the meaning that we come from that comes from writing. But I guess reading goes hand in hand with the process, doesn't it? So with reading comes writing. They always say that the best readers are always the best writers. But recently, a study was conducted, and the results showed that reading is not really popular among Malaysians, with just an average of only 2 books a year. So, what do you think we're doing wrong here, Zach? Why is it that we're not reading? What's the reason?
I'm not an expert at all in statistics or like literary habits or whatever. I can only speak for myself. Um, I mean, I rarely do any reading these days. Like, I'm ashamed to admit that I, a poet, writer, author, barely do any reading. Barely do any reading. And I think one of the problems is that like capitalism and stuff like that. But books are like expensive. Like if you want to buy like something from like you know uh from like overseas, like American authors, it's like 40 ringgits down the drain. It's like even my books are like kind of expensive and even local because it's like printed privately, like from a privately owned business. And I think it's not fair that everything has to be expensive. And but that's the reality of it. Even I sometimes, like, I'm ashamed to admit, I might get into trouble for this, but if I see a book that I really want to read and it's really expensive, I try and find like a free version online.
Yeah, yeah,
I know piracy is like low key crime, but like everyone does it. And books, I mean, these authors are like already rich, like they wouldn't miss like a book or two being pirated. But yeah, but even then, like, right, like reading from like a phone, a digital device, it sort of like doesn't really,
mm,
when you're like reading a book, like it's like the smell of the pages and like the
yes,
feel of the
yes,
paper. So yeah, but to answer your question, why people aren't reading, I think it's an attention problem. I hate to admit it,
right,
it's an attention problem. People will like scroll through TikTok for entertainment these days. They will watch Netflix, if you want a good story, why read it when you can like watch it, watching Euphoria and Stranger Things and like, Miss Marvel and like WandaVision. And it's easier. I think it's just easier than reading. And I think for me also, it's sort of, other than poetry, like I sometimes read poetry, I guess. But there aren't any good poetry books these days that I want to read. So but yeah, I think it all comes down to attention. I definitely think there are readers, there are like avid readers, like hardcore readers who read like 5 books a week. Like, like that's like putting me to shame, and I'm an author, like an author poet. So yeah, I think I mentioned this before. I do have attention problems. Like it gets really terrible sometimes. So yeah, I think I would really have to like, and you know what, the problem is about having attention problems is that when you do read something, you cannot put it down. You hyperfixate on it so bad that you can't do anything else. So when I find like a good book that I want to read, I have to finish that book in one day. And it can be like 300, 400 pages, and it'll be a problem, an actual problem in my life. So yeah.
And I think, honestly, I think that is a very reader problem. Like I think a reader that is really into to books and poetry and really like literary fiction and things like that. And I think they just can't put a good book down. And I think that's it. And I've always felt that with reading, if you feel as though you're not someone that likes reading, I feel like it's because you haven't found the book that you enjoy. I feel like there's a book for everyone. Everyone out there, there is a book for them. And I think they need to find that book. And once they find it, I want to believe that that's when the reading spark will sort of ignite.
Yeah. You when you mentioned a very good point there, finding a good book. I think one of the dangers of being, I still consider myself an avid reader, but the danger of being an avid reader is that once you find a book that you like, you will read it. That's why I try to avoid bookstores at all costs, and I try to avoid try to find a good book because I have like a list of books that I want to read, but I never end up following through and like reading them because I was like, okay, if I read this, I'm gonna like be obsessed with this book and it's gonna ruin my life. And the last book I read was Cersei by Madeline Miller. That book ruined my life. Like it was sad. It made me cry. It like
Right.
made me like reassess my own existential crisis because it was so sad. The main character was like, okay, no spoilers lah, but it was really sad. She was really lonely, and there's this book. I'm not sure if you know. It's all over TikTok. People were like reading it. They were like, it's called A Little Life.
Hmm.
Do you know about it?
I've heard of it, but I haven't explored it. But if it's a good book, I would definitely have a go at it.
So like people were like telling everyone like don't read this book, you'll ruin your life because I just read the synopsis on Wikipedia and it's a terrible book. I mean, it's beautiful written apparently, but the main character goes through like outrageous forms of abuse and like trauma that like so that's the thing about books. Like it'll either destroy your life or you know, in many ways because sometimes the book has a tragic ending that you weren't expecting. And I can't go through more trauma.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think for sure.
you
I think
know?
yeah, yeah, no, I get it. But I feel like that is a sign of a. Sometimes I feel like that's a sign of a good book as well. When you get so fixated in it to the point where
Yeah.
it affects you emotionally, and you feel like a kind of loss at the end of
Mm.
it. I think that is a sign of a like. Although it seems like a sad experience, but it sort of it means that that book somehow connected with you, and yeah, and I usually feel that way at the end of trilogies. Like once you finish the last book, they're like, oh wow, that's a real loss, and you've read it in a row and
Yeah.
things like that. But that's what we want, right? We want people to experience that, like to have that feeling when you read, almost to the point where you become upset, but also happy and things like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Some books are just too depressing, way
Yeah.
too depressing to engage in. Um, it's been so nice talking to you, Zach. And we're actually at the very end of the show. And there is a question that I ask all my guests. And this is for me the most exciting part because I always get very different answers. So I'm going to ask you the question now, Zach. So, what's one myth about millennials that you disagree with?
Okay. Yeah, I've been thinking about this answer a lot. So I don't really know that many myths about millennials other than that we're entitled. But not to disregard all the entitled millennials out there. Each generation has their own entitled community with, like, outrageous demands and, like, but I think the older generation doesn't like our assertiveness, I guess. I feel like poetry is a political act in a way. We're trying to enlighten people. I always write about, all this 9 to 5, um a 40-hour work week, all this, capitalism things that, are just making people unhappy. And there's been so many research done on why, remote work and working from home is just as effective as, if not more than, working at the office. You're not commuting like 2 hours a day of your life to go to and from work, stuck in traffic jams, just to get into the office and waste your time there. It gets a little frustrating when people say we're entitled, that we're spoiled, that we're, asking too many things, that we're, lembik lah, lemah, but it's like the world is getting harder, and we're not there is no effort for our hard work, you know, like I hate to bring up the side hustle grind culture again, kan, but it's sad that we have to have 3 4 incomes just to survive, just to be happy in the world. In places like New Zealand and like Switzerland, I think. Don't quote me on that, but there are places in the world where, the cost of life is amazing. They have free healthcare, free education. People are happy. They make, like, I don't know, 4K a month and stuff like that. So it's not impossible. Like, people can do it, and Malaysia is rich in resources. But itulah, like, when you talk about being entitled, I feel like the older generations are much more entitled. They want to preserve the status quo lah. They want to, all this racially dividing rhetoric that they're going, like, Indians, Malays, Chinese. Like, what is the point of that? Like, we're all humans. Like, can you guys stop trying to divide us? Like, and people using religion and, like, all this organized fraternity to tear people apart. Like, God, like, can we
Yeah.
just live our lives? We just want to be happy. We want, affordable healthcare. We want, you know it's not
Yeah.
entitled to us for basic human rights, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that. I mean, I don't want to say it is right in a lot of ways, but it's also the means to live as a human being, right? Like
Yeah.
these are not big demands or demands by any chance. They're just things that, like you said, we need to survive and hopefully
Yeah.
thrive as well in the climate that we're in today. But do you feel like it could be a kind of silence mechanism, like how perhaps they don't want us to be demanding and entitled because they want to silence us in a way so that things are maybe perhaps easier for them? Could that be it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like a lot of our systems are purposely done to, like, weaken us, like divide us in a way. People who work 40-hour work week, they don't have time. They're trying to recover from the week before to even bother demanding for their rights. I get back from, like, 5-day work week, and I'm exhausted. Like, I don't have time to go on the streets and protest in the weekend. I'm trying to, like, recover from the mental and physical torture of, like, what happened in the previous week. So yeah, like, I think if they ever implemented the 3 or 4 day work week or work from home, they'd be in trouble. They'd be in trouble because there will be a lot of people with free time and free resources who will go out in the streets and demand their rights.
And thank you for sharing that because I definitely am very for the entitlement thing. I don't think millennials are entitled. I think we deserve to voice our opinions about things that we can, and I don't
Exactly.
think there's anything wrong with that. But thank you so much for being here today, Zach. It has been so lovely to have you on, to have a fellow millennial that is so passionate in what he does,
Yeah.
and is so giving. I think in so many ways because it's a passion, isn't it? Writing is a passion, and and you're giving to other millennials and to other Malaysians with your work. So thank you so much. Is there anything that you would like to say before we end the show?
I just want to thank you for doing what you do. I feel like there should be more podcasts about you who like, about done by millennials, trying to destigmatize, what we do, like, all the myths about us, I guess, that people are trying to perpetuate. And thank you for inviting me. I don't get to do these kinds of things often. I'm really tired during the weekend. So yeah, this has been fun. Thank you. And to anyone who wants to buy A Stranger Wicked Man all across Malaysia. I think there are not many copies. So if you wanna ensure you get the book, you can go to penwings.com. There's a store there where you can get my book. I think it's much cheaper than if you will go to MPH or Popular. So yeah, support your local authors, support your local creators, and the best of luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zach. It has been such a pleasure having you on, and all the best to your career in writing and poetry. And we
Thank
look
you.
forward to seeing more of your works in the future.
Fingers crossed. Thank you. Thank you.